coming up, we have John Peltier with Let Users Interact with Your Charts. John is a master of leveraging the power of Excel to produce and simplify complex solutions in engineering, finance, and marketing. John has been a full-time Excel developer since 2004 and part-time since 1994. John has received the Excel Most Valuable Professional Award every year since 2001. John holds a Doctor of Science degree from MIT in metallurgy and has over 20 years of experience in research and development, manufacturing and product support in the aerospace, automotive and industrial parts industries. John's background includes data visualization, statistics and Six Sigma. And John is here with us today, so if you want to put any questions into the Q&A, do feel free to do so and we'll deal with those at the end. So with no further ado, I will start the video.
Welcome to Excel Virtually Global 2023. My name is John Peltier and I'll be talking to you about interactive charting in Excel. That is, here are ways to let users interact with your charts. You see my email address and website are listed here. I welcome you to send me an email with questions about this or suggestions for alternatives that I may not have covered. And I invite you to visit my website where I have a blog with hundreds of tutorials on various Excel topics, including charting, programming, and what have you. And before I get started, let me first say thank you to the people that are bringing us Excel Virtually Global 2023. And I'd like to thank them for inviting me back for my fourth year to present a topic to you. Before we make anything interactive, I'm going to talk about a static chart first for a moment. This workbook you should have been able to download before the session so you can play along now or when you watch the video in the future. So how do we interact with a static chart? I'll select the chart and the data range is highlighted in the worksheet, and you can actually do some interacting with the chart using this filter button which floats beside the chart. If you click on that, you see a list of all the series in the chart, and as you mouse over them you see that one is highlighted in the chart, and there's also the different categories. In this case the months are showing, so you can selectively show or hide certain data points from the chart. For example, you can click on to unselect rising, you say apply, and we only have the falling and steady data series in the chart. This is nice if it's your own chart and you're playing with it in the privacy of your own office. But once you publish this to a report or something, using the filter mechanism is not a very user-friendly way of filtering a chart. Somebody has to be familiar with it, and also you have to unprotect your sheet and unlock your chart so that someone can use the filter, and that just opens up all kinds of other problems with maybe someone will do some ugly formatting to your chart, or they'll remove the wrong things, or they'll damage it. You don't want to do that. So I'm going to show you a bunch of ways that are more friendly for users to interact with the chart. In my first example, I'm just going to show how to adjust the chart and the worksheet supporting it so that you can select which one series out of several to show in the chart. The way the workbook works is there will be one sheet that is ready for the process to be implemented on, and then the sheet right after it will have it worked out so that you can come back and reverse engineer it if you need to. So to show one series in this chart, it currently shows 3 series. What I'm going to do is put in a green cell the number of the series I want to show. Eventually we won't be typing numbers into this. We'll use other mechanisms to change that number, but for now, for the next few examples, we're just going to do it manually by typing and changing those numbers. And now what I want is to put data. I don't want to disrupt my original data, so what I will do is use a formula to put the data for the selected series here, and that's the series that I will chart. And I'm just going to use a simple index formula. It's a dynamic array formula. I hope you're all on Microsoft 365. And so I'm going to do index of the whole data range, not including the category labels, the months. And I'm going to index it by the selected number. If the tooltip is in your way, you mouse over it until you have the 4-headed arrow and you can just drag that out of the way. Now I want to do this row, and then I want to do all the columns, so I can either leave it blank after the comma, or I can type a 0, and that will put all the columns in that selected row. So here's the data for series number 1. Here's the data for series number 2 as I change the number. Now, of course, if we'll use another mechanism to indicate the number, because if the user is allowed to type numbers and they'll type a 4, that's an invalid number. It's not that many rows in the range, so that'll be wrong. If he types in 0, that's a spill error, because what it wants to do is fill down to where, including the cell that I typed the 0 in. So we'll say 1. And now we only want to show one series, and what I'll do is I'll modify the chart highlighted data range. First of all, I'll make it only one series in size, and then I'll drag it down to include the formula that selects a given series, and I'll say enter. And now as I change the selected number in this cell, you see the chart updates with the selected series number. And this is a pretty elegant approach. It's just very easy. You notice that the formatting doesn't change as the number changes. They're all formatted the same, and this might be fine for you, or it might be a problem if the series colors have some additional meaning in addition to just the label and the values. There's a slight modification to the previous technique if you want to preserve the formatting of the series in your chart, as you only show one of them. So again, we have the cell with the changing number. What I'll do first is I'll add just a simple set of numbers, 1, 2, 3 in the first column. In the second column, I'll do equals a formula equals if that set of numbers I just added, if it equals the selected number, then we'll show the label. Otherwise, we'll just make it blank. And I typed a period instead of a comma. I do that all the time, but mostly when people are watching. And then another formula here, and again, equals if that set of numbers I added equals the selected number, comma, the chart data, comma, and then if it's false, I don't want to make it look like a blank because Excel plots that as a 0. What I want to do is put NA, which you'll see it gets these ugly looking formula error messages, but those ugly looking error messages are very nice because they're not plotted in the chart. And besides, this data is going to be hidden on some other sheet somewhere. And so now, as I change the number in the cell, you see the label changes and the number changes. So the number that is there as opposed to that is turned into NA changes. And so now what we want to do is make the chart use the data down below, not the data up above. So we'll select the chart. You see these highlights? I'm just going to drag them right down to my formulas. And so now I have rising in the blue color. I change it to 2. I have falling in the orange color, and I change it to 3, which is steady, and that's in the green color. So I've preserved my formatting. Very nice. An alternative to showing one series and hiding the rest is to show all of the series, but mute them somehow, and then highlight one series. That way you see that one series in context of all the data. So what we'll do is we'll take our series and we'll de-emphasize them. So I'll select one of them and Control-1 to format. And so the first formatting thing I'll do is I'll remove the marker. So I'll come down here in the Format Data Series, say None for marker, select the next series, say None for marker, select the last series, None for marker. Now I'm going to apply a light gray line color. So instead of the standard orange from the theme, I'm going to come over and pick this. It's a 25% gray. It's light colored gray. And now when you change a color, you can select another series and just hit F4 and it'll apply that new color. You can't remove a marker or change a marker shape. You can change a marker color and use F4 and repeat it on other series. And then these are 3-point lines, which is 2 1/4. They're 2 1/4 point, which is 3 pixels. And I'd like to use 2 pixels instead, 1.5 points. So I select that and change it to 1.5. Select the next one, F4. Select the last one, F4. So now here's my background, all my data. And what I want to do is the same kind of formulas that I used before, and I'll say equals index here, and I'll index my data range, comma, the row number that I've typed in the green cell, comma 0 for all the columns, and enter. So here's my data. So when I select my chart, you see what's highlighted is all the data that's in the chart. What I want to do is add this other data to my chart. And the easiest way to do that is just to select the data and copy it, right click on the chart, and if you're using a recent build of Excel, there's this paste special selection on the right click menu. If you don't have that on your right click menu, you can come over here to the paste drop down, and there's paste special there too, and you get the same little dialog. We're going to paste the data as a new series. The data's in rows, that's correct, and series name in the first column is correct, and I'll say okay. And here's my added series, and let me just format that. I didn't want the markers on the background material because I've de-emphasized it, but I do want it on my highlighted series because to me it draws a little more attention, and I like putting markers on my data because I like knowing where the actual data is. If you just have a line, you don't know if there might be any real data points intermediate on the line, use markers. It's just much more clear. And so now here I am formatting, highlighting my series. I'm going to add a data label to the highlighted series. And what I'll do is I'll select just the point. So one click selects the whole series. The second click, and it's not a double click, it's 2 single clicks, selects the label. I'm going to go to data labels on the little chart elements, fly out, and you click the little right arrow thingy, and we're going to go to more options. And because the default is to show the number, but what I want to do is show the series name and not show the value, and forget the leader lines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that label a little bit larger so it's easy to read. I'll make it bold, and I'll give it the same color as the series uses. And so now that's nice and clear. And as I change the selected number, you see now that's falling is showing, and 3 steady. And the magic of this is all the gray lines are there, but just the highlighted line covers up the gray line that plots the same data, and it looks like you're just highlighting that one line. You can enhance the previous technique to maintain the colors of the series. So if you select rising, for example, it will be blue, and if you select steady, it will be green. And I'll show you how to do that while you're just highlighting and showing the rest of your data de-emphasized and highlighting one series. So again, like the previous way that I maintained my colors, I put the series names in the first column. And what I'm going to do first of all is a very simple thing. I'm just going to say equals that range and equals that larger range, and we'll link it to that number in a minute. This is going to be my data range that uses the colors, so not the original range. So I'll select the original range and drag it down here, and now I have you'll see that the series rising is series number 1, and if in my series formula you see 1, and steady you see series 3, and falling is series 2. And what I'm going to do now is add the same data. So copy, select my chart, right click on it, paste special, or use paste special on the ribbon, and new series in rows, series name in first column, and I'll say okay. And now you see I've got 3 new series, and they're different colors. Rising, this rising is 4 because I had 1, 2, 3 before. Rising is 4th, falling is going to be 5th, and steady is going to be 6th. So we have to do 2 things. First, we have to change the formatting of these added series. So I'm going to select one of them and do Control 1, and we're going to get rid of the markers. So marker option none, And for steady, marker option none. And you can see, if you look, that the markers from the other series are showing behind the new fat colored lines. So we're going to take those lines and we're going to make them gray. So I'll find that nice 25% gray, and you can still see the dark blue marker behind, so we haven't changed that any. And we'll turn the green into a light gray, and we'll turn the magenta, no, plum is the official color, into light gray. And then we'll also change the width to 2 pixels. And I forgot to use my F4 key when I was changing the grays, but I remembered it when I was changing the line thickness. And now what we want to do is we want this series, instead of being number 4, we want it to be number 1. So you can just edit right in the series formula, change the series number to 1, and now it's behind. And we'll come to steady, and we'll change that. Well, actually, we'll do it in order. Falling is 5, and we want to make that 2. And then steady with 6, we want to make that 3. And so now we see that our originally formatted lines are now in front of the gray lines. Now I just need to change my formula so that only the selected colored series shows. So let me come here, and now it's linking up to the original data. So let me wrap that in an if. So I'll say if my string of numbers equals my selected number, comma, that original range, or else NA. And we see that the range is updated and the chart is updated. Only one of the colored series shows, and the others are gray behind it. So, and if I change 1, 2, 3, you see that the chart updates, the right series is highlighted with the right color, and everything is cool. I showed before that letting the user change the number in this box to select their own series is not the most user-friendly way to do it. First of all, they have to select it and type a number. Second of all, if they type a number that's not a valid entry, they're going to get something wrong happening to the chart. Well, how can I let users change this value but protect them from breaking things? And there's a number of ways to do it, and I'm going to show you those number of ways in the next several minutes. The first one I'm going to show is a form list box. And a form list box is something available on the developer tab. If you don't have the developer tab, right click somewhere on your ribbon in between buttons, and it says customize the ribbon. And you just scroll down the list of tabs and check the box for developer, say OK, and now you have the developer tab with all of its nice features. So on the insert button, you can click down and you can see there's a bunch of icons for form controls, and there's a bunch for ActiveX controls. And I'm going to show you first the form list box, which is on the form control menu. You have to read the tooltips as you mouse over the different controls. And here's list box, and I'm going to draw a list box. You see my cursor is turned to the crosshairs, which you get for anything drawing. And I'm going to hold the Alt key down so that it will draw the list box with its boundaries on the cell boundaries. And here's my list box, and you see there's a little bit showing under, so I'm going to use the Alt to resize it. And now that covers those colored cells, reminding me where I wanted to put my list box. Now we have to format the list box in order to put the values we want in the list and what to do with the selection from the list. So I'll select Format Control, and it pops up this dialog, and you see I have an input range, and that's simply the list of items I want to show in the list box. And then cell link, that's the cell where the result gets placed. And for these form controls, the result is just a number indicating which item in the list was selected. So my cell link is going to be that cell there, my green cell with the number in it. And I'll say OK. And you see right away it breaks because there's nothing selected in the list box, and it put a 0 in that cell. But if I select one, you see rising and falling and steady. And this works with any of the techniques I showed. I'm just using the simple show one series item, but anywhere I had those green shaded buttons, boxes, cells, I can point my list box at it. And it's actually a really easy way of working this. And even if the the list box is on a protected sheet, it still will, clicking it will still change the value in that cell. So, and the list box, I like a list box because it shows all the items at once. If you need to use less space though, you could use, let me click here, there's also a combo box, and I can check that. I'll just show you how that looks. And again, I'll use the Alt key and I'll go boop, and there's my list box. And you see it's going to work the same way. I'll right click on it and I'll format control, and I get the same input range, and I'll select the same list that I want in my combo. And I forgot to set my cell link, and I set that the same way, and I click on it over here and we go OK. And you see it broke again because there was nothing selected in the combo, but I can fix that, and I can select rising from the list. And now rising is in the combo, rising is also in the list box because they're both linked to that one same cell link. And if I change one, I change them both, and I change steady, and that turns steady. And actually, if I type a number in there, it changes both of my controls. Another alternative would be a radio button like this, and it looks like that, and you have your button and it has text. Now you don't have a list fill that will set the captions of those buttons. What you have to do is manually select the text and change that, and the first one is rising and so forth. But you still have a cell link, and it says well, the first one that I added to the worksheet is number 1, the next one would be number 2, the next one would be number 3, and that's how it fills out the cell link. Now there's problems with these. First of all, they only work in Windows and Mac. They don't work online or any other like handheld kind of endpoints for Excel. And it's like, let's say, sometimes somebody will shrink it down to 70% because they want to fit in more columns and some. Look how these have shrunk, and I can right click on it and format control, and there is a size tab, but that's only the size of the list box. That has nothing to do with the size of the font or anything else. There's really nothing I can do for that. As nice as the list box or the other form controls are, they're just not formatable to make them as nice as they might otherwise be. ActiveX controls work in a similar way to the form controls, and I'll show you how they work right here. Again, you find them on the Developer tab, clicking on the Insert drop down, and there's the form controls, which we just saw, and ActiveX controls. And I'll do an ActiveX list box. Click on that, your cursor turns into the crosshair, and you use the Alt if you want the edges of the list box to line up with the boundaries of the cell. And here's my list box. And I really can't do much to format it yet. There is a format control button at the bottom of the right click menu, but it doesn't have a control tab. It has size only, and that's the same as just sizing the shape of the list box. But you notice up here the button for design mode is checked. That means we're designing this control. So let's look at properties. This is where you find the different things you need to set, and you see there's quite an array of properties, and there's a list fill range and a linked cell. Now you can't click here and then select the range. Watch what happens. You do that, and the list box becomes unselected. What you selected, the range you selected, now is selected, and the properties refers back to the worksheet, not to the list box. So we have to click back on the list box, and we have to type in what the range is. This is rather inconvenient, but it's the way it works. So I'll say H3 to H5 is the list fill range, and then and you see it's already populated, and the link cell is the cell that you want the result to be placed. But we want the result is not 1, 2, 3 depending on which one is picked. The result is actually the text of the label that is picked. So what we're going to use for the link cell is this cell here, I9, which is next to our green cell. So I9, and now I'll say enter to set all those in place, and I can get rid of the properties pane. I can turn design mode off, and now watch what happens. Steady is selected in this cell and is selected on the list box. Let me make this, I'll make it a little wider in a minute. If I select falling, falling appears, and rising, rising appears. So what we need now is just a match function to find, oh, it helps if you spell that right. So to find that cell within the list, and 0 for an exact match, and we say enter, and now this is going to work just the same as the other list box. The problem with the, now I go into design mode. If I want to change that, I'll make it a little bit wider so we don't see a scroll bar. And if I can go into properties to change the format. If I want to change what the font looks like, I click on font, and there's the 3 dots way over here, and I'll click on that. And you see it's using the Aptos, the new theme font, 14 points. Well, let's try something else. I used to use this Arial rounded a lot, and let's make it just bold, and let's make it bigger, and let's see how that looks. And you see now we have, you know, full control over what it looks like. What we don't have control over is whether it works in other versions of Excel. It doesn't work on Mac, doesn't work online, doesn't work on any of the handheld endpoints. It only works in Windows. And there are occasions when these ActiveX controls can be a little bit flaky. They might move, they might be a few rows over next time you open the sheet and so forth. Those problems aren't as pronounced. They were pronounced a decade ago. Now they're not so much, but I think they can still be a problem. But again, they only work in Windows, so it's probably not the best choice of a control to use. Another way to let a user select a number for a series to show is with a data validation drop-down list. This is more flexible than the ActiveX or form controls because, first of all, they work in every version of Excel. They work online, they work in handhelds, they work Mac and Windows. They are pretty easy to set up, and they you can size the at least the result of the validation because it's a regular cell. So the way you do that is you select the cell where you want the validation list, and I'm putting it next to the cell that has the series number, and you go to the data tab, and this teeny little button here is for data validation. So you click on data validation, and under criteria you want to allow a list, and it asks for the source of the list. You can type a list here, you know, hard-coded with comma separated or whatever, but you can just as easily select your range and say OK. And when that cell is selected, you have a little drop down like a combo drop down. You click that and you get a list. Now this list always is this size. You can't affect that, so if you're zooming out, it's going to be hard to read, but other than that, it's easy to use, and you can select one of your items from the list, and it appears here, and we'll write a simple match formula in the next cell, and it's going to include the equal sign, John, and we'll go match. We'll match the cell, we'll match the list, and we'll use a 0 for an exact match. And now when we select a different item, we see how quickly that updates. It's very smooth. People will understand how it works, and there it is. Using a table slicer is a really simple way of filtering data from a chart. It takes into account a couple of properties in Excel. One is that when you filter data in a table, it hides the rows containing the filtered data. It doesn't remove the data from the sheet. It just hides the rows. A chart, if any of the data for the chart is in a hidden row or column, it won't be shown. So when the table is filtered, that data is hidden, and the chart won't plot it. So what do we need to do? Let's convert our data range into a table. So I'm putting a header on the chart here, and you notice I have another column over here that is hidden, but it's well, it's not hidden, it's blank, but it's part of the chart data. So I just added a header just so it's included in the chart. And now I come over to the Home tab, Format as Table, and select a style I like, and there it goes. And is that the data for my table? Yep, that's the data I want to use. And my table has headers, so good, we're ready to go. Here's my table. And I can use the filter button to filter if I want, but I'm not going to make my user do that because you have to click on the thing, and it's got to open, and you got to figure out what you want to do. I'm just going to insert a slicer, and you can insert a slicer with the active cell in the table, either on the Insert tab, there's Insert Slicer over here, or on the Table Design tab, there's Insert Slicer right here. So we're going to insert a slicer for the series column, and here it is. It's very nice. And so I can select any of these, and the ones that are highlighted in the slicer are visible in the sheet. And you can see as I change the selection in the slicer, I'm changing the what's visible in the sheet. I mean, in the chart and in the sheet. And this is really kind of nice because it was easy to set up. Now there's there's a positive and a negative issue with it. First of all, the nice thing about a table is if I add more series to my table, what would happen? I don't have any numbers here, but if I had numbers here, you would see that they'd be plotted on the chart along with the original series. The chart expanded to include the new data, and the chart, the slicer expanded to include the new series, and that's a very handy thing. Now this is going to illustrate though a problem with this approach. If I hide rows, a chart keeps track of what rows it covers. So if I hide some of those rows, the chart's going to shrink because it's covering a row now that has 0 height. So if I select one of my original series, look at what happened to my chart. It shrunk, and that's easy enough to remedy. There's a property. If I select my chart and I go over to the Format tab and click the thing on Size, under Properties, by default, a chart has this set: Move and Size with Cells. So if cells disappear, the chart sizes based on the cells it was covering to begin with. But what we want is move and don't size with cells. It's okay to move with cells. If we insert a row, we want it to move with the data around it, but we don't want it to shrink when we filter out some rows. So we'll select that. Now, of course, if the data is on another sheet somewhere and your chart is on your report, on your dashboard or whatever, this doesn't matter, but it's not always that way. And so set move but don't size with cells. And now watch what happens. I can select any one of them, and the chart hasn't changed its size. The chart just behaves nicely. And this is such a simple, elegant little approach. It might be all you need to filter your data. We can use a pivot table slicer in much the same way as we just did a table slicer to filter data in the chart. Our data doesn't have to be in a pivot table. We don't need to make a pivot chart. What we are doing is just simply making a small pivot table that will give us a slicer to get the effect we want. It's an easy enough thing to do, and I'll show you how. We're just going to use this little piece of data here and insert a pivot table for that little piece of data, and then get a slicer off of that. So what I'm going to do, I selected the data. It's just that column. I'm going to insert pivot table from table range. And you see the choices here. Yeah, that's the right range. I'm not going to add this data to the data model. That would be kind of silly. It's just a tiny piece of data just to help us get something done. And we're going to put the pivot table in the existing worksheet right here. And I'll hit enter. And here's my pivot table. And pivot table fields, I'm just going to select series. And here's my pivot table: series and falling, rising, and steady. That's my pivot table. That's all it is. Very easy. And again, you can filter using the built-in filter buttons, but they're not as easy as a slicer. So let's add a slicer. You can either get it from the Insert tab for slicer, or you can go to Pivot Table Analyze and insert slicer right there in the middle. And we want one for series, and click OK. And here we are. It looks just like the other slicer, and it's going to work just like it. Look, as I change my slicer here, my pivot table changes. So now all I need to do is for my green cell with the series number, I'm just going to use a match formula again. So match rising, comma, the series list, comma, 0 for an exact match, and again, and there's 1. So this range already has the formula built in. So as I change my slicer, you see this row of data here is updating. And now what I need to do is change my my chart data, so it uses the formula, the calculated one, the filtered one, and like this. And now, bing, my pivot table slicer is changing my data just the way we expect it to. But look what happens if I select more than one item in my series slicer. I have two items listed under series, falling and steady, but only falling shows in the chart. And of course, the reason for that is we used a match formula, and it's only looking at the first item in the pivot table, not any subsequent items. So if you want to use this the way the table slicer worked, where you could look at multiple series, you have to do it a little differently, and I'll show you that in a minute. We're going to make a simple pivot table, just as we did before, a dummy pivot table with a slicer, but we're going to adapt our formulas so that it will allow multiple series to be shown at once, and each series will have its own unique formatting. So what I'm going to do is add a series label above the list of series, and I'll select that range, and I'll come to Insert, Pivot Table, from Table Range, and I'll uncheck Add to the Data Model, and Existing Worksheet, I'm going to put the pivot table right here, and say OK. And here's my pivot table. We're going to use the series, and there it is, just like the last example we did. And just like the last example we did, I'm going to insert a slicer, and here's my slicer, and we're just going to drag it right over here and leave it alone. Let me make it a little smaller. So now when we select things in the series, it just fills out the pivot table. And I'm going to do now another little trick. I'm going to use a COUNTIF formula to count how many times the labels in the pivot table appear in the list of series. So equals COUNTIF, and I'll select these here, and keep in mind that if we're filtering, it'll give us different results. So COUNTIF there and there, and I'll say enter, and now everyone appears, so we'll say 1, 1, 1 for all of them. If I only select falling, falling is the second one here, so that's how often the second one appears. If I do rising, that appears here. Steady is the last one. If we have multiple ones, well, that's what happens. And so now I just need a simple formula. Our chart data right now is the upper data, but I want to write a formula to determine which are going to be visible, and I'll say equals if that number, and I could say if that equals 1, then whatever, but if it's just any number non-zero, it's true, and if it's 0, it's false. So if that number, then I'm going to include that. Otherwise, I'm going to do NA. And so here's what it looks like with all the data. So what I'm going to do is drag this chart source data down to this calculated data. And now I can filter. And so if I just want falling, click. Falling is the only one that appears here. The others are NA. Or rising, rising appears. Rising and falling, control click. Rising and falling. Steady, there's that. It's the only one there. It's the right color. And if I select them all, they're all back. Here's a gotcha that might cause problems. I have a chart here, and I'm only showing one series at a time. Here I have millions, and millions is a big value. And I have a custom format, which using this number format, 0, comma, comma, each comma gets rid of 3 sets of zeros. So the first one gets rid of thousands, the next one gets rid of millions, and then I add a suffix that looks like millions. And there's that. Then I have another series, and I'm just going to drag the data manually. And now I have hundreds, and it's hundreds, and it's a simple 0.00 number format, so it shows 2 decimal digits. And then I also have percentages, and that's just 0%, my format, simple number format. And now you look, I've plotting percentages, and my axis is uses the same number format as my data, because by default that's what Excel does. And I move to hundreds, and I have hundreds and 2 decimal digits. Well, you probably don't want the decimal digits, but that's not the point. The point is, as I move the data, the chart keeps up, because now the chart's pointing at a different range with different format, and the same with the millions here. So if I make myself a little, the same scheme as I've used before to show the series in that box, I just use index like this, and index this whole range, comma, what's in that cell, comma, 0 for all the columns. And well, you see, I have this, I don't have the number formatting applied. So now if I move my range down to this area, which is what I was going to do anyway, now I don't have the nice number format on the y-axis. And if I change my format here, I don't have the same number format. And if I change it to 3, I don't have percentages. That's just a fraction. That's not really handy. What I can do is conditionally format this range and get those formats. And I've pre-conditionally formatted this range. I'll show you what the formatting looks like. I'll manage rules. If it's more than 1,000,000, I use the 0.mm. If it's less than 1, I use a percentage. Otherwise, it's just going to use the number. And so let's see what happens if I do that. I'm just going to copy this formula and paste it down into this other range. Let me paste it there, enter, and you see now the formatting is good. If I go to 3, yeah, there's my percentages. In fact, it's an extra digit on the percentage, but I'm not going to quibble with that now. It's just the way the format works. So now let me select my chart and drag the data down to the new range. Ooh, that was, I typed the 1 in the wrong place. I meant to type the 1 here. So now I'm going to use this lower range with the nice formatting. And, well, no, the formatting didn't come through. The formatting didn't come through, and last time the formatting didn't come through. The problem is conditional formatting formats are not the format of those cells. They're display formats, but not the actual formats. The actual formats there is just general. If I look up here, it's just general, and that's all I'm getting in my axis. So I can't use this approach to filter my chart data. What I can do, though, is I can name ranges here based on what is selected in this cell. So let me change that back to 1. And I'm going to create a couple of names. And so one name is going to be SRS name, short for series name, and one is going to be Y values. And so I'm going to come over here to my formulas tab. I'm going to define a name. And the name is going to be SRS name, not all this extra stuff. I'm going to scope it just to the fixed axis format tab. And that formula is going to be equals index and just the columns, the column of names, and comma, I'm going to base it on that cell right there. And let me say OK. And now I'll create another name for the Y values. So back up to define name, just Y values. We'll scope it to this sheet, fixed axis format, and it we refer to and index, open paren, select the range we want, comma, and here's the index, the cell with the index we want, comma 0 for all the columns, enter. And now let's just test how this is going to work. In this cell right here is going to be SRS name. This is just going to show me the value of what these names are that I defined. And this is going to be equals Y values. And so millions, and those are millions. And I'll change it to 2, hundreds, and those are hundreds. And I'll change it to 3, and those are, well, they're fractions. I didn't get the formatting, but this is just the values that we're testing right now. Now we're going to put them in the chart, so I can get rid of those. So I can select my series, and the series formula, we played with the number at the end once before, but what they are is the series name, the X values, and the Y values. The X values are fine, but we're going to change the Y values to those names that we created. So this is going to be series name, and this is going to be Y values, you see, and I'm going to say enter. And now you see it's referring to data in this range of the sheet when I select millions. And because it's referring to this data, it's using that number format in the axis labels. And if I change this, I'll keep the chart selected. Okay, I'll change this to 2, and now hundreds is selected. If I select a chart, you see it's selecting this actual data up here because of the name I created, and it's using the number format of those cells. And if I change this to 3, and my chart is using the percentages, and it's using the percentages of the format from that range as well. So we don't even need to do the index formulas here. We can create names, and I can just get rid of this stuff altogether because it's not needed. This last example will show how you can not only let the user decide what data to show in a chart, but actually which chart to show. In this example, it's very simple. I have 4 different charts plotting the same data just to illustrate the technique, but you could use it to show, maybe one is showing your revenue projections, another one is showing production line efficiencies, who knows what. The way it works is by using a linked picture. And the way a linked picture works is I'm just going to copy a range of my worksheet, and you could copy a range of data, but I'm going to copy the cells behind the chart. It doesn't work directly with the chart, but anything that's in front of that range of cells becomes part of the linked picture. So I'm going to copy that range behind the line chart, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on the paste drop down menu, and it says linked picture, and I'm going to paste it as a linked picture. And what we see in the formula bar is a link to that range of cells behind my line chart. So far so good. We're going to need to be able to link to different ranges. And so if I look in the name box, I have a set of names that I've already defined. Table 1, Table 6, those are on other sheets. Pie chart, column chart, and bar chart are on this sheet. They're the other charts beside the line chart, and I'm just going to come up to formulas, and I'm going to create one more name, and that's for line chart. So let me define that name, and I'm going to call it line chart, line underscore chart. They're all done with underscores, so we need to be consistent, and we'll scope it to this worksheet, which is the last one. It's select chart, and the range is going to be the range, as I said, behind the line chart. So I'm just holding shift while I move around with the arrow key, and I'll say okay. And so that's my line chart. And now let's set up a pivot table and a slicer, as we've done several times before. Here's what I need. I need the list of charts, and so I'm going to come over here, pivot table from table range. I've done this a few times, haven't I? And we're going to not add it to the data model. Existing worksheet, we're going to put it right here, and I'm going to say okay. And we'll take that pivot table and put chart into it, and that's what we have. And now while I'm still over here, let me analyze, insert slicer. Click. We're going to insert a chart slicer, and it's saying, okay, which chart are you going to choose? And if I say bar, that's what appears here. If I say column, it appears here. Line and pie. And if we select multiple ones, it's the first one that's going to win. So what I'm going to do is define another name, and I'm going to call it selected chart. So let me come up to formulas and selected chart, and I'm going to scope it to select chart, that sheet that we're on, and I'm going to define it as indirect, and indirect of a certain string, which is going to be that cell, the first cell in the pivot table. So it's I8 and in quotes underscore chart. And so what that means is select chart I8, that's bar, so bar chart is what that string is inside the parentheses, and indirect means point me to the range that's called bar chart, and I'll say okay. And now I'll come over to my linked picture, which already has a link here. I'm just going to change that link, and I'm going to change it to selected chart. You see it, IntelliSense gives that to me as an option. So double click, hit enter, bar chart. That's what's the first item up here. Column chart, there's my column chart. pie chart and line chart. Isn't that quick and easy? And imagine how this can really jazz up your dashboard. Thanks for listening to my presentation. I hope you'll find some of these techniques useful for making your charts interactive. Again, my name is Jon Peltier. I'm an Excel MVP since 2001. My company has been around since 2004. Visit my website, a lot of great tutorials, or check out my software. I do training sessions similar to this, and I do bespoke programming for people that need help with Excel. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that, John. There was a lot of content there. As you can see, for the attendees, I've now put the evaluations form up if you'd like to comment at all on John's session. I don't think we've had any questions. There was so much covered in there.
Yes, thanks. If anyone has a question, you can type it in the chat and I'll be glad to answer it. Otherwise, use this QR code or use that link to provide feedback on the conference and on this session.
Okay, so I have a question, although it's not directly linked to what you've just been showing us. Obviously, we've had Python's been a really big thing, having Python and Excel and the charts with Python. Have you had a chance to look at how much user interactivity there is there? And do you think they compare with Excel charts well or badly in that sense?
In terms of user activity, I'm not sure. I haven't used Python very much. My daughter is a data scientist and she's telling me, Dad, you got to learn Python. And this has been for years. And I have George Mount's book here. It's Advancing into Analytics, which covers Python, among other things. And I've played with it. I haven't learned it enough to really do much, but there's neat stuff there. The way that Python is implemented in Excel, every time you make a change, any of your Python stuff has to be recalculated. And so that means it has to go back to the cloud and come back down. So there might be a certain lag in there. But then Minda Tracy has done some work using, the Python output, and it gets dumped into the worksheet. And then you can use techniques like this so that you're only using some of the Python output in your chart. And since you're not recalculating the Python stuff, you don't have that delay in terms of getting it calculated up on the Microsoft Azure cloud. So it really boils down again to how clever you are writing formulas that point to certain parts of the data that you want to display.
Oh, that's an interesting response. So maybe a hybrid idea. There you go, as an idea for your next presentation. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that presentation, John. I'm going to put the evaluations back up on the content now. That should be back up any seconds. Talking of lags. There we go. So thanks very much for that. It was very interesting. And anyone who didn't get to watch that all the way through, it will be available on the Some Product YouTube sometime after the event. So thank you, John.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.